All right, let's do this. Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Gary, and if you are new to, let's fix this up a little bit. Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Gary, and if you are new to my channel, you have no idea what you are looking at right now. I am an educator who teaches internationally, and I have been recently trying to unpack the tolerance.org standards and outcomes. So I'm going to highly suggest, if you haven't taken a look at any of the videos previously to this one, go back, familiarize yourself with the anchor domains, and then come back to this video where I'm going to be specifically talking about the first identity standard. All right, so the first standard that I'm going to be looking at within identity is students will develop positive social identities based on their membership in multiple groups in society. I am super excited about this standard because it allows students to right away identify who those groups are and why they are important to them in their lives. We as individuals, as teachers, as adults, often are a part of different groups. And in all of those groups, we hold different identities, have different experiences, and we create different personalities and character traits because of those specific groups. And it is extremely important that we allow students to do the same thing. All right, so let's hop right into it. I'm gonna start off by showing you an example of an individual that I think most people know. She goes by the name of Malala. Malala's story is very intriguing. It is very sad. It is very informational, but is a great story to start in all grade levels. One of the reasons why I think this story could be easily taught within this standard because there are so many groups and memberships that Malala belongs to, and along the way she is learning positive identities within those groups. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the video, and what I want you to do is while you are looking at the video, try to identify the positive memberships and identities within the groups that Malala belongs to. You can take this time to infer what some of those groups are, or you can take exactly what the book is telling you and write those groups down as well. Clear as mud? All right, let's check out the story.
Malala, a Brave Girl from Pakistan by Jeanette Winter. Who is Malala? The Taliban fighter demands, looking into the school van. Malala is a girl who isn't afraid. I will power myself with knowledge, she says. Don't go to school, the Taliban fighters tell the girls in Swat Valley. Don't read, they say. The girls don't listen. They are brave girls. The schoolroom holds their sun and blocks the threatening shadows. But away from school, a dark cloud follows them everywhere. Every day, the Taliban broadcast their warnings. No school for girls, they say. But Malala is a brave girl who speaks out. I have the right of education. I have the right to play. I have the right to sing. I have the right to talk. I have the right to go to market. I have the right to speak up. The brave girls of Swat Valley outwit the Taliban fighters by wearing everyday clothes to school. Their uniforms stay hidden at home. Malala speaks out again and again. They cannot stop me. I will get my education, if it is home, school, or any place. There is no peace in Swat Valley. The Taliban burn and bomb the schools. Still, Malala speaks out. The extremists are afraid of books and pens. They are afraid of women. How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education? Attending school becomes more and more dangerous. Girls travel to and from school in a van for safety, until one day, a Taliban fighter stops the van, looks inside, and demands, "Who is Malala? Speak up, otherwise I will shoot you all." He shoots Malala. The van rushes her to the small hospital in Swat Valley. A helicopter lifts her to a bigger hospital far away. A jet plane flies her across the ocean to a still bigger hospital. Everywhere, the doctors work to save her. The shot fired at Malala is heard the world over. Prayers from girls and boys, women and men surround her bedside. Slowly, Malala wakes from the nightmare. She opens her eyes, holds a book, and smiles, and her voice returns. On Malala's 16th birthday before world leaders, she speaks out again, stronger than before. They thought that bullets would silence us, but they failed. One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. The world hears the voice of this brave girl from Pakistan and listens.
All right, so as I'm listening to Malala's story, I'm starting to think about what are the different groups that Malala belongs to. And as students are doing this, they're going to come up with a number of different things based on inferring, based on what the book tells us, based on communication. So as I'm listening to this story, I'm thinking about the number of groups that Malala belongs to. Students are going to try and think of groups as they are reading this story. They're going to infer after reading this story, and they're also going to come up with ideas after talking to each other in groups. What I really strongly suggest is that you allow students to, as much as possible, think for themselves and write down whatever it is they believe is the correct answer. There are multiple groups within this story that they may come up with that you don't come up with as well. As I'm listening to the story, I'm thinking of community. Malala belongs to this community, this Pakistan community where she lives, and this is where she has been brought up. That is one of the identities that I think she belongs to. The second one that I'm thinking that she belongs to is the school system. She goes to this all-girls school where I believe she is possibly treated a little bit different than she does at home. I believe that school life experience for her was very positive. So again, that is another group that Malala belongs to. Now, for this one, I do think that Malala belongs to a different group that was on the bus with her when those terrible things happened. And that is an experience that you would think has been traumatic for her, and probably it was. But at the same time, she was somehow able to grab it and make a positive influence out of it. So I would put that in as a group also. And lastly, I would think she belongs to the group where she's at the UN Youth Assembly and she is actually sharing her story. That is like a milestone for her. That is something that she has done because of what she has gone through. Now, all of these experiences have influenced her in many ways. She was somehow able to grab a positive out of these experiences and use them to help her in life. These are positive social identities. Now, there are many social identities that we didn't talk about. Some of them that we could infer a little bit about. Malala is a female. Female is a specific group. All right, so this time I'm going to play another individual that most of us are very familiar with, and I want you to do the same thing. I want you to listen to the recording, and then I also want you to use what the recording has told you, what the pictures have told you, or infer some of the groups that this individual may belong to, keeping in mind social identities.
Nelson Mandela. Written and illustrated by Kadir Nelson. Roli Shasha played barefooted on the grassy hills of Kunu. He fought boys with sticks and shot birds with slingshots. The smartest Madiba child of 13, he was the only one chosen for school. His new teacher would not say his Xhosa name. She called him Nelson instead. Nelson was 9 when his father joined the ancestors in the sky. To continue his schooling, Nelson was sent miles away to live with a powerful chief. Brace yourself, my boy. His mother held her tears and said goodbye. The chief held council to warriors, medicine men, farmers, and laborers. The elder ones told stories of old Africa. For centuries, Tembu, Pondo, Xhosa, and Zulu peoples lived in the mountains and valleys of South Africa. The land was bountiful, fertile, and rich. The people hunted, fished, and raised crops, living in relative peace. But they made war on the European settlers, who came in search of land and treasure. The settlers' weapons were stronger and breathed fire. Slowly, the people were conquered. Their land was taken and spirits dimmed. South Africa belonged to Europe. The elders grew quiet, and Nelson felt sorry. Nelson grew into a young man and attended fine schools in the golden city of Johannesburg, where Africans were poor and powerless. Nelson became a lawyer and defended those who could not defend themselves. The government grew harsh and created a cruel policy. It split the people into three: African, Indian, European. It was called apartheid. The people were set apart. European-only beaches, European-only parks, European-only theaters. And the people protested. Nelson organized rallies to fight apartheid. We must win back Africa, he told them. South Africa is for all South Africans. Mandela, he shouted. Ngowetu, they responded. Power to the people. And the people loved him. Speaking out was against the law, and Nelson was arrested and jailed for a fortnight with 100 men. They danced and sang, calling the ancestors to join the fight for freedom. Amandla Ngowetu. The ancestors sent their daughter Winnie to stand next to Nelson. They found love and married and welcomed children into the world. Together they stood and fought apartheid. The state vowed to put Nelson in jail, and he went underground. He wore different disguises and lived in the shadows. Empty flats, farmhouses, and bedrooms of friends became Nelson's home, while he organized more rallies and protests. The police put out a warrant for his arrest, but they could not find him. Nelson slipped across the border to visit free nations, where Black, Liberians, Ethiopians, and Moroccans freely conversed with white Europeans and brown Egyptians. They shook hands, a glimpse of freedom for life at home. Nelson returned to South Africa to cleanse his homeland of hate and discrimination. With a vision for peace and harmony, Nelson felt renewed and ready to fight for freedom. But on a drive to town, he was captured, arrested, and taken to jail. The people cried, "Free Mandela! Free Mandela!" Wet paint and posters covered South African walls. On a small island off the coast of the southern tip of Africa, Nelson sat in a tiny cell every day. The world passed by him. Cold mealies, thin blankets, hard labor. Nelson hammered rocks into dust and read, studied, and educated fellow prisoners. Days turned into weeks, months, and years. His children grew up. Relatives passed away. South Africa began to fall apart. There were more protests, more rallies, and violence. The people needed a leader. Nelson snuck a message to the people. I will return. As years passed, the world pressed South Africa to change. The new president agreed, and European-only signs came down. Beaches, parks, and theaters opened. Nelson's comrades were set free. Apartheid was no more. Nelson was an old man. After 27.5 years, the prison gates opened and Nelson was at last set free. Thousands surrounded him and Winnie hugged him. Nelson looked into the sky and smiled at the ancestors. Mandela, thank you. The sun sparkled in his gray and white hair. Nelson stood proudly with the wind at his back and spoke to a colorful sea of people. We must forget our terrible past and build a better future for South Africa. Let us continue to fight for justice and walk the last mile to freedom. Millions were given the vote and elected Nelson Mandela their new leader. South Africa was free at last and finally at peace. The ancestors, the people, the world celebrated. Amandla Ngowethu.
All right, so what did you find? The first thing that I'm thinking about is family. Family often, and I don't want to say all the time, because sometimes family isn't a group that kind of stands out for some people, but family, South Africa, jail, those are the three that stand out for me in this story. And I do believe that within all three of those were positive memberships of social identity groups. Again, I think it is extremely important when we're doing this work with students, we are allowing them to dig deeper on their own. From there, talking to peers, and then from there, bringing it back to the rest of the classroom, and then allowing them to expand on their answers. We don't want to crush the wonder. So you're probably wondering, what is social identity? Social identity is basically how one feels about a membership in a specific group. I'll say it again. What is social identity? Social identity is how one feels in the membership of a specific group. Groups give us a sense of belonging in the social world. In order for us to uplift or enhance our status, sometimes we change within these groups. And naturally, we sometimes change because of our gender, because of our race, etc. I've created this easy to use graphic organizer to help students track their social identity. Here's a very easy to use simple graphic organizer to help students track their social identities. And you ask, why is this work important? It is important because identity is who you are. Students need to know who they are as people and that they belong to different groups. Students may use answers such as, I belong to a soccer team, I belong to a baking club, I belong to my choir. And they are right. Those are all different groups with social identities that they belong to. And they're going to start to notice that they act different when they go to soccer. They act different when they come to school. They act different when they go to choir, and that is okay. That is what we are looking for. Social identities are made up of so many different things. If you want to look at social identity a little bit deeper, you can look at some of the things that students may not talk about. They may not talk about race, they may not talk about sex, they may not talk about gender, they may not talk about religion. Those are also all social identities that some of our students belong to. An easy way to look closer and find out what groups are most important to us is to look at groups in a sense of secondary and primary. Primary groups are the most important groups in our lives that we spend the most time with, and secondary groups are not necessarily unimportant, but we don't spend as much time with them. Understanding the differences between these two groups are essential. It is important that students know that there are primary social identity groups and secondary identity groups. As an elementary teacher, I see myself doing some of the work that we've already done together, asking students to look at read-alouds, giving out articles or videos, and asking students to do some of this work on their own. Coming back as a group, talking in pairs, coming back as a group, talking in small groups, and then coming back as a group and talking as a whole, and having a full grand discussion about what social identities are. It's very important when doing this work that students get to practice this work on a person of interest, someone that may look like them, someone that they are interested in, someone that they already know about. I think when we look at middle school and high school, I feel like the only big change for me would be looking at positive and negative social identity groups. Negative meaning, how has this identity group influenced this person or yourself in a negative way? I do think elementary students are ready for this, but not right away. I think they need to start off with something positive before they get into the work of how some of these groups can be negative towards them. I think middle schoolers and high schoolers should be looking at the work and asking themselves, how do struggles define who they are? How do struggles define their identity group? And how are some of these groups portrayed in the real world? So what is social identity? Social identity is basically how one feels about their membership in a specific group. I hope that was helpful. I know it was a lot of information. If you have not gone back and looked at the other outcomes and the unpacking of those, I think that would be a great idea. If you are on this journey as well, please feel free to subscribe, send me a message and ask questions. Before anything, I am just a teacher trying to figure out and understand these standards and domains as much as possible. I'm on a journey and I'm excited. Until next time, subscribe, like, leave a comment. Peace.